Where do you stand on this pyramid? Are you a consumer, simply knowing about information and accessing information? Or do you step up to number 2, where you're an interactor? You engage mindfully with content and you're able to sort of see what's going on and you actually seek out content. Or are you a critical consumer? You can deconstruct media messages, look at the sender and receiver, you can decode and encode messages really well. Are you on the number 4 level, a producer of media messages? You go on TikTok and you create some videos, you might share photos and other things with your friends on social media. Are you an integrator? Are you able to sort of do everything? Create messages, decode messages, deconstruct messages. Think about where you stand. Think about where your friends stand. Think about where other people in your lives stand on this pyramid. And is there any way we can move you up the pyramid and help you move your friends up the pyramid as well? That's basically the focus of this. So this is a presentation that Dr. Goulet, Dr. Ria, and I have done several places in Spain and also in Traverse City, talking about rooting out truth decay using media literacy. So that's the topic for this week's module, is media literacy. So people are entitled to their own opinions, but not to their own facts. I thought that sounded like a Mark Twain kind of quote, but it turns out I was totally wrong. That quote came from the 1900s rather than the 1800s, and a bunch of statesmen and people in American government were the ones who sort of talked about the idea of facts versus opinion and all that. So I did some investigating, and that's one of the things we want you to think about doing, is doing some investigating when you see some kind of claim that's out there in social media, in the news media, or any other form of communication that you receive. So we're going to talk about truth decay, we're going to talk about trust, polarization, disinformation, and some media literacy, pre-bunking and debunking. So the RAND Corporation, which is a think tank based in the United States, looks at public policy issues. And they talk about truth decay as being one of the most important issues facing us. And this was back in 2018. All right, the diminishing role of facts over opinion. So we've got this whole idea about facts being sort of, generalized, that people don't believe facts. And people think that opinion are facts. So people say something and people believe it. Right? And we've got this sort of overwhelming influence of opinions over facts that are sort of permeating our society. And then we've got with this huge declining trust in formerly sort of institutions that we trusted all the time. Right? The consequences of this are pretty strong. There's civil discourse. How many of you have sort of given up talking to somebody in your family due to political or economic or environmental concerns that you don't see eye to eye at all? Right? Look at what's happened in Washington with political paralysis. The Republicans and Democrats can't work together. We can't get anything passed. Right? We were alienated and we disagree about everything. The weather, sports. There's this huge sort of polarization going on. And that creates uncertainty. So when you're sort of really sort of disgusted with things, you decide not to do anything, which really isn't good, especially in this election year, which is going to be a huge consequential election, not only in the United States, but in 40 other countries, affecting about 2 billion people here in 2024. Right? So do you consume information with intention? Right? So you're looking for information and you really sort of search it out. It's not some things that sort of show up on your feed. You actually seek out information and verify it. Right? Do you share information responsibly? So when something comes across your phone, do you immediately sort of send it and share it with friends and like it? Or do you sort of take a minute and look at it? Right? Do you hold friends and family accountable for the messages they share and send with you? That's really important. And do you ever get offline, and sort of look at things in the real world and not have a device in front of you? So your generation, for most of you who are this age, Generation Z, you don't have a lot of trust in a lot of organizations and institutions. So if you look at Congress, you look at the news, the presidency, tech companies, information you find on the internet, Supreme Court, criminal justice system, police, you do have some trust in science and some trust in the military. But once you get past those two, there's not a lot of trust out there. So if you don't trust these institutions that have been around for centuries, who do you trust? What information comes from reliable sources that you actually sort of believe? Right? So Edelman is a company that looks at, it's called the Trust Barometer. And one of the things they do every year is sort of look at countries all around the world and sort of what's the big issues. And in 2023, the big issue is the battle for truth, along with mass class divide, institutional imbalance, and economic anxieties. So the whole idea of misinformation and disinformation is a huge issue, not just in the United States, but across the continents around the world. So you look at countries that are severely polarized. Look where we are. The United States is right up there, along with Colombia, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, and Argentina. There's a whole bunch of other countries that are in danger of severe polarization. And that severe polarization leads to a lot of distrust and a lot of sort of uncertainty and sort of just no activity at all. This is Pew. Pew Association, Pew Research Center has done some really great research. So global climate change is really important across 19 different countries, but so is the spread of false information. And this is from 2022. Right? So again, the whole idea of disinformation has sort of really become important in a number of different areas. Oh, I apologize for the shark song. This was the most viewed video on YouTube. 13 billion counting. I love it. It's going online a lot. There are a couple of kids going on there. So the importance of sort of media literacy sort of starts when you're 2 or 3 years old and you're using the internet all the time. You may have seen this in previous
525,600 minutes.
On the internet.
525,000 moments so deep. 525,600 minutes.
Hours.
How do you measure a year? In daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, in
525,600 minutes.
clouds of coffee.
That's a lot of stuff going on the internet. And that was from 2 years ago. So think about this sort of timeline. We're going to talk about print media and broadcast media in the next weeks ahead. Talk a little about digital media. But what about synthetic media? And that's just sort of happened in the last few years, where we now have media that's created entirely without a human touch. So I mentioned we presented this in Spain last year. And when we went to Spain, we wanted to sort of do some sightseeing and travel. And sometimes you might want to get a guidebook. So if you go onto Amazon and look for guidebooks, all of a sudden you see all these books that were created entirely by AI. Right? They all came out about the same time. They're really very low quality. So AI just went on the internet, scraped information about the various places that are listed on some of these travel guides, and created these books that are now charged, $18 to $20, and really you could get all the information for free online. There's really not a lot of insight or analysis. Right? We wanted to go see a soccer game when we were in Spain, so I asked Bard, which is Google's version of ChatGPT or AI, hey, is there any games we can go see at home? And it said, yeah, FC Barcelona plays when we were there at home. So I went to the FC Barcelona page, typed in the information. Well, no, they weren't at home, and their home stadium is under construction, so they weren't even playing at the stadium they usually played at. So they were on the road, and their stadium wasn't even available. Right? So I typed that in and said, hey, they're not playing. And basically the Bard said, oh, my bad, I apologize for the error in my previous response. So these are called hallucinations, and this happens a lot with AI, that they just sort of make stuff up. And you may have discovered that in last week's lesson when you looked at AI in terms of coming up with media theory sort of summaries. So this was again about a year or so ago. What's the Pope wearing? This hit the internet and sort of the social media, and people were like, "Oh my gosh, the Pope's really stylish," or "What's the Pope doing wearing a very expensive coat?" Right? This is totally created by AI. And speaking of the Pope is looking at disinformation. It says it's one of the 4 of the sins of journalism is misinformation. So the Pope is even weighing in on the whole idea of misinformation and disinformation being a very serious issue going on in the world today. You may want to pause this and sort of look at different kinds of fake news, but there's partisan sort of conspiracy theories, there's pseudoscience, there's misinformation, there's sponsored content that doesn't really look like it, there's clickbait. I think we've all seen these kind of misinformation, disinformation things going on. So think about all the ways that fake news is sort of propagating in our society. This is the National Association for Media Literacy Education. This helps us fight disinformation and brush away truth decay. So that's sort of the theme of this slideshow. Who made this? Why was it made? What's missing from this message? Think about these questions you ask as you get media messages that come across your desk. You're going to be able to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act. So media refers to all electronic or digital means in print or artistic visuals. So we're looking at a really broad scope of different kinds of media. Printed, not printed, online, all those kind of things. Literacy is the ability to encode and decode symbols. So we're in a communication class, so the ability to take messages in and then produce your own messages. And the media literacy is basically sort of combining those two ideas. You can encode and decode messages, and you can also synthesize, analyze, and produce these kind of mediated messages. And mediated basically means there's some kind of technology involved. So media literacy education, a lot of states and countries are sort of looking into this. A lot of countries are way ahead of us. But you want to require active critical thinking about the messages we receive, right? Again, we're talking about a wide range of media. Many of you are creating media yourself. The things you actually create for this class and share online, even in Blackboard, that's sort of mass media because you're sharing the same kind of information with an audience. Even though there's only like 20 people in class, it's still a mass media audience, right? So think about the skills you need to build your media literacy education. So facts matter. We're going to talk about pre-bunking and debunking. You're going to play a game that helps you sort of pre-bunk, right? So this is built on inoculation theory. So you've heard a lot about inoculations, about sort of things with COVID and measles and flu. You get a vaccine and it prevents you sort of from getting that disease or getting it very seriously. Right? So it helps you sort of spot and refute misleading claims right before they go viral. It's really important. And what happens, this is nice, is because it's non-judgmental. It's non-accusatory. There's a message out there. You look at it and you go, this just doesn't sound right. We're not going to share this. We're not going to make this sort of go along and go viral. A lot of advantages to this. It's well tested. It's easier to scale. You sort of stop the message before it goes out there to millions of people. You stop it in its tracks before it becomes sort of that viral message. Right? Don't really have to have a lot of education or anything to do this. It's sort of a wonderful way of looking at messages. So this is Flick. You're going to do the cranky uncle game. And it's going to talk mostly about these kind of things, these manipulated messages. If you've had communication classes before, you might have talked about logical fallacies, ambiguity, ad hominem attack, slippery slope. But there are other ways of sort of manipulating you. Fake experts, impossible expectations, cherry picking, and conspiracy theories. So the game you're going to play is going to take you through these sort of 5 different ways of sort of manipulating you and using media, misinformation, and disinformation to get you to think a different way than you probably should be thinking. So Cranky Uncle, the link and everything is in there, so I'm not going to sort of spend a lot of time on that. There's also another game called Bad News that you can go use that sort of helps you sort of figure out how bad news and social media works. There's also Spotting the Troll, how many accounts are real, how many accounts are fake, created by bots or anything like that. So there's a number of ways of sort of pre-bunking, getting that information out there right before so the viral messages don't go viral. There's a whole bunch of other ones that are out there. There's new games that are being created. And what happens is this seems to work. You get sort of inoculated, and now when you look at messages, you sort of take a little more critical eye to them. You don't just sort of accept them at face value. You do something with them in terms of, I'm going to investigate more. So that's pre-bunking. That's sort of before the message goes out there and sort of becomes mainstream. Now we're going to look at debunking. So debunking happens after a message is out there, something comes across your feed on Facebook or in Instagram, and you're like, this just doesn't sound right. So there's ways of sort of looking at this message and figuring out if it's any good or not. So this is SIFT, the 4 moves of SIFT. So I'm not going to show you the video, but the video basically is a guy who gets online. I don't remember if last summer there were some problems with the wildfires in Canada, and sometimes the smoke and haze was all around here, even in Michigan. And so this guy goes on Fox News and basically says, there's no problem with this. I'm with this organization called Energy and Environmental Legal Institute. There's this kind of smoke everywhere. China has it. India has it. There's no health dangers. Right? Do you believe that message? So SIF requires you to stop. You get this message, and rather than share it or do anything with it, just stop and think for a second. Right? The I stands for investigate further. Right? Look up this guy's name. Look up his organization. Look up reputable sources to talk about air pollution and the wildfires and the dangers they might present with that smoke and haze. Right? The F stands for find better coverage. Right? So some of you think Fox News is legit, some of you don't. Some of you think the same thing about MSNBC, legit or not. Find some sort of unbiased or more scientific or accurate sources to get information from. And T then, trace it back to the original source. Where does this sort of start? Where did this whole sort of thing originate? So SIFT is a really important message to sort of think about when things come across and how you can sort of look at media messages. All right, this is a beautiful little baby peacock. This came across some people's social media feeds again last year. If you do any kind of research, you use SIFT, you're going to find out that no, baby peacocks do not look this cute. They're kind of ugly, right? But you do some research rather than sharing something. Again, sort of not very serious, but think about serious messages about environmental issues, about social justice issues, and sharing some issues and things like that that are not legitimate with other people. And all of a sudden it just sort of spirals and becomes viral. We're going to talk about NAMLE. You can go online. There's some notes in here about NAMLE and the media literacy education, authorship, purpose, and economics. Why were these messages created? Who created them? Why did they do it? What about the content? What tricks did they use? Many of you are in BCA. There are certain styles and things you use in BCA to make messages more relevant and more resonate with people. Same with work in journalism or other forms of media. There are sort of techniques and tricks you use to get people to pay attention. Take a look at those. Think about how they are being used against you. And then reflect and interpret what's going on. What are they asking for? Why are you thinking this way? How do they make you feel? Right? So ask these key questions. I'm not going to show you the part for Dune because that movie's coming out pretty soon anyway, but if you look at a trailer or anything like that and you ask some of those questions, who made this? Why did they make this? What's the purpose of this? How did it make you feel? Think about media messages and how important they are to you and how much time you spend. We've already done an assignment on how much time you spend with media, and for many of you, it was a lot of portion of your day is spent on media. Right? So you need to really think about messages. All right, back to that. And then we sort of look back to the sort of media literacy profile. Again, this is a bit like a 15-minute sort of slideshow. I don't think it's going to bring you up on the pyramid at all. But think about ways you can sort of create a better pyramid for yourself and your friends and family and the people you'll deal with, and move up that pyramid to become more of a media sort of investigator rather than just sort of a consumer. Thank you very much for listening.